All right, welcome back, everybody. In today's lecture, we're going to be breaking down one of the most challenging activities for this class. Well, I say that in sort of an imperfect way. This particular assignment that we're going to be working on is a huge component to all research that you're going to be conducting, not only for this class, but also for all of your future classes. Some people, when they start in on this project, are very familiar with the techniques and ideas around what this is really centered on. And others, when they come into it, are either just unprepared for doing this particular step or just kind of have a lot of emotions that get tied to it because of anxiety or just kind of frustration with some of the nuances that come along with what we call the data analysis portion of the research project. So what we're going to do in this lecture, sort of try to walk everybody through what's expected, hopefully refresh everybody on some ideas that you've covered in your previous stats classes. I hope you've covered them in your previous stats classes. Try to get as many people through this component of the class as possible. I do want to warn you, though, that in previous semesters when I've taught this class, this is a watershed moment for a couple students. If you did not have the appropriate education in your stats classes, either you took it at a place where they didn't really push you, maybe you just didn't really get through the class successfully and you were sort of pushed through instead of being required to take it again. This is one of those moments where this task can feel just impossible. I can try to help you as much as I can. I would strongly suggest you work with the tutoring center if this is something you know is going to be a potential problem. But we have had students in this class that were doing fine up to this point, and everything starts to sort of unravel, and they realize they got to go back another semester and take a stats class before they're ready for this portion because doing here is really utilizing the tools that you have to have learned or developed in those previous classes. With that warning said, and I feel bad that I have to do it, let's break down why this is this huge thing and what it is that you're expected to do in this data analysis activity. So for this section of the class, what you're going to be doing is breaking down the research data that I've sent to you. Right? I think almost everybody in the class by the time you're watching this recording will have an Excel file with data in it. It's going to have different variables that are presented relating to the ideas that you have. And it's going to really get into the specific numbers that I want you to be able to analyze for your research project. Obviously, all the stuff that you got was just made up data. That's intentional because we're skipping a lot of steps along the way. But the data that you have sent mirrors what you've come up with in terms of ideas. I know a number of you probably got a lot of feedback before we got to this point. Again, this is a typical thing because this is a really challenging component to doing research. Now, you've got an operational definition that you think you sort of understand, and then I try to give you data and it doesn't make sense, or you've got yourself too much information or too many things that you want to study. So we've had to parse stuff down, but however you got to the point where you're at, hope my guess is everybody has an Excel file with data in it. This Excel file usually is going to contain information about two, three, a maximum of four variables that you'll be using for this particular project. What I want you to do in the first component of this is define exactly what type of variables you've settled on. Specifically, I need to know whether or not your variables are numerical. That usually means the ratio or interval. If you haven't had any reviews on ratio versus interval variables, I encourage you to look at the link that was presented called Statistics Made Easy. They covered a little bit, but just the gist of it is ratio variables are one where there's something called a true zero, and where, as the name implies, ratios matter. Now, lots of variables can have zeros in them, but true zeros are when you have something where we kind of had an absolute minimum for whatever thing that you're looking for, and it's not an arbitrary minimum. Say how much do you like something on a scale of 0 to 10, and you put a 0. That's not an absolute minimum, right? That's more of a hypothetical lowest score possible. Where if I ask how many, I don't know, airplanes you own, I'm guessing most of you would list zero. And you can't have less than zero airplanes that you own. And if you own one airplane versus two airplanes, you own half as many airplanes. And that's what we call ratio variable. It's a real quantifiable nature to the numbers that you're using. Um, this is one thing that variables could be ratio or interval variables, where they got numbers associated with them and the numbers have specific components to them. We could have categorical variables, which fit into two different groupings. They're called ordinal variables, where we've got kind of a spread of scores that fit into groups. You could talk about, age groups as ordinal variables, where you're an infant, a child, an adolescent, or an adult. And obviously, the ranges within those groupings can vary. You get small, compact ones when we look at the younger ages, and then much more open-ended ones when you get to the other groupings. The fact that they go in a specific order, though, makes them what we call an ordinal variable. The other categorical variable that's out there, and I'm hoping you've heard of this one before, is called a nominal one, where we've got groupings, but order doesn't matter. Right? It could be something as simplistic as, gender, male, female, non-binary, three different groupings, and people are going to have to give an indication of which grouping they associate with or they identify with. Could be a much more complex one, like, say, favorite ice cream flavor. And you just list your favorite ice cream flavor, or maybe you even group them into sections, chocolate-based ones, fruit-based ones, nut-based ones, whatever. The point here when we're looking at nominal variables isn't exactly how we want to divvy up the different groupings. It's just when we're looking at the groupings for them, there is no kind of preset order to them. What you need to be able to do is look at your variables that you've been provided and figure out what is the type of variable that I'm looking at. You might ask yourself, well, why do I care about that? Well, once you've identified what type of variable you're looking at, that's going to dictate the next step that you need to take. And it's determining what types of analyses you're going to be conducting. When you're running analyses for your research project, you're probably going to run a multitude of them. You'll probably figure out the averages within groups if averages make sense. They don't really make sense for nominal or ordinal variables, but they will for your numerical variables. You can talk about spreads. You can talk about frequencies within groups if you're dealing with your categorical variables. So lots of what we call descriptive data should be things that you're analyzing. But then more importantly, what you're going to be doing for the research project that you're conducting is looking at your inferential statistics. This is about whether or not you found differences between the groups that you have or correlations between the variables that you've collected. And to determine which inferential statistic you're going to be calculating out, you got to know what variables you're using. Because depending upon the variables you're using, you're going to run different statistical analyses. Now, if you've had stats, and you've gone through this and been successful, this is not news to you. This is something you already know. You should know, hey, when I've got, say, nominal variables for my independent variable, you got a treatment or you didn't. And I've got ratio variables for my second one, the strength of the response or how long it took somebody to reduce something. Then what you're looking at is a very specific type of analysis test. If you've got two sets of ratio variables that you're looking at, you got another analysis that you should be doing in terms of your inferential statistics, looking at how well those two variables go together within the participants that you have. This class is not designed to teach you all this stuff again. I cannot. I will not, because you're supposed to have already had this under your belt, go through every single statistical analysis that you should be running for your project. If you're at that point where you really don't know the differences, again, this might be a big watershed moment where you kind of recognize that it's important to go back to that statistics class, take it over so you actually know what we're talking about here and have an idea about what type of analysis you would probably do. If it's on the fringes of your understanding, again, tutors might help. You can even set up a meeting and just try to figure out your train of logic and where you're at with it. But regardless of where we need to go with this, your analysis section should describe the tests that you're going to be doing, the inferential test that you're going to be doing, and why you're doing it. Don't just say, hey, I'm going to do an independent samples t-test, or I'm going to run a one-way ANOVA. Tell me why you're doing this. What's the reasoning behind this specific analysis? And this will involve you revisiting the variables that you've introduced. After that, you probably will do one less set of analyses that is more about projecting what these results imply overall. So you're going to talk about specifically effect sizes here. And again, the effect size you calculate out is entirely dependent upon the types of variables you have. So if you run an independent samples t-test, the effect size measurement or the effect size calculation that you'll be running is predetermined. You don't get to just randomly decide what type of effect size you're calculating out. It's based on the data that you have. Again, I want you to describe within that section what effect size measures you're going to be calculating out based on the numbers of variables that you have and what it is you're looking at, and then justify why you're doing that. This also should have been covered in your stats class. I understand some don't. So this might be a little bit more challenging. I can try to help you with this to an extent. But the notion is that once you're done with this class, you are done with all the guardrails. You're done with all of the checks that we ensure that you're ready for that senior thesis. So just sliding by with this section in this class might put you in a situation where you're going to have a senior thesis. They're going to expect you to be able to calculate out effect sizes, understand what they mean, what the point of them is. And if you don't, that might be a huge problem for you in terms of being able to finish that project and graduate. So I encourage you to, again, look for help if you need it right now. And if you're good on this for the most part, just get through it, really show strong understanding in it. If you're a little phasey or a little fuzzy on this, talk to somebody, talk to a tutor, review old notes, figure out a way to understand this because this is a big thing. After you're done calculating out those specific things, you're then going to go into the conclusions about it. You're going to talk about statistical significance. That brings you back to alphas and p-values, stuff that you probably had some familiarity with. You're going to talk about what the size of the effects you are looking at are. Are they small, medium, or large? You're going to go into a lot of different details based on the results you have. And you're going to kind of allude to maybe where this leads you to the overall conclusions of your study. Now, we're going to have another section that's going to get into that next. So I don't want to spend too much time dwelling on it, but I need you to have the tools you need to be able to make those conclusions, to be able to draw an inference around what it is you found after we're done with this component of the class. If you do struggle with this and it's off, I promise you, you will be getting feedback and I will be trying to work with you, because if we don't get this, if you're not here, we're done. We just can't move on to the next step. So again, this is only worth 10 points, but it's a major component to the class. So if you need reviewing on significance, and p-values, on effect size, results, all of that, by all means, get started on that right away. If you're looking for how to analyze the data once you come up with tests, note that I sent you an Excel file. There is the ability to actually calculate out those statistics with Excel files. You can go through walkthroughs on YouTube and other stuff. We're trying to get a reminder of how to conduct a t-test on Excel, or how to conduct an ANOVA on Excel, or a correlational measure. The chi-squared even can be run on Excel, which is kind of interesting. But regardless of what type of analysis you're going to be doing, again, entirely dependent on the types of variables that you have, not just something you get to choose. You have to base it off the variables you have. Look those things up. The other option you have, if you still have some of the programs that we use for our stats classes, like R, or what's some of the other ones that we use, SPSS is one that we sometimes get to use in the school. By all means, use those. Just transition the data that you have in the Excel file over to those and show me that you can do those calculations. And then hopefully you'll be able to carry over these results to not only this rest of the section, but all the other components that we're going to be going through in this class when it comes to interpreting the data and tying it into the grand scheme of things. Whew. I know this was a very long lecture, but obviously this is a very weighty one. So if you need help, I encourage you again to start reaching out. I provided a video here that sort of goes over some statistics and how they sort of work. It's called the Statistics Made Easy video. Honestly, one of the things that it does also is provides you with a ton of links about what types of tests you might be looking for. So the same person that made the Statistics Made Easy video also did one on t-tests, ANOVAs, and chi-squares, and what they actually mean. So you can get a better sense of how to present things. But again, I do have to warn you, if this is something that you are just not even close to understanding or familiar with, I'm not sure how helpful that video is going to be. An entire semester is required usually to get through this stuff, not my little 10-minute video here and not the 10, 15-minute videos that you have linked up. It's a heavy lift. I mean, and I totally get the fact that this is one of the most challenging things for psychology majors often is getting through the stats and getting through the ability to kind of use those numbers that you're calculating out and make conclusions around the topics that you're interested in studying. But we got to get there. Please do reach out to me if you've got more point of order questions and trying to figure out stuff. It's the time to reach out to the tutoring center or somebody else that could help you if you really are lost on what analyses you're going to be doing or what these things like effect size actually mean. But regardless of where you're at, put your best foot forward here. Do as well as you can on this. And hopefully we'll get you through this and be really, after you're done with this, on the path to really finishing up this product. Because if you can get through this, it's downhill from here. It's a lot of work still. Don't think we're at the finish line. But it really is downhill from here if you can get through this component of the class. That's it for today. I hope you're all doing well, and I guess I hope to speak to you all soon in our next video for the next module. Take care.